Here's what I want you to do. Close your eyes for a second. Picture a forest at night. No moon, no phone in your hand, no sound except the wind moving through branches somewhere above you. Now imagine hearing something move in the dark. Something you can't see. Notice what just happened in your chest. That wasn't imagination. That was ancient machinery switching on. Something that has been running uninterrupted across an unbroken chain of generations, from a creature crouched in the African grassland all the way to you, watching this video in a well-lit room. Most people assume ancient humans' deepest fear was the obvious thing. The enormous predator, the saber-toothed cat, the lion at the water's edge. But here's what the actual evidence shows. The fears that did the most damage, the ones that left permanent marks on our biology, our art, our religion, our nightmares, were not the ones you could see coming. And one of them, in particular, is so old and so deep that it built the entire architecture of human civilization. Let's start with a skull. In 1924, in a limestone quarry in Taung, South Africa, a small skull was unearthed. It belonged to a child, roughly 3 years old, from one of our earliest ancestral relatives, Australopithecus africanus, roughly 2 million years old. For decades, scientists assumed this child died in a rock slide or was taken down by a leopard. It was the obvious explanation. Then, in the mid-1990s, paleoanthropologist Berger took a closer look at the damage around the eye sockets. The puncture and scoring patterns were consistent with a large bird of prey, most likely a crowned eagle, having killed the child and transported the skull to its resting site. This child was never chased. It was killed from above by something it likely never saw coming. That detail keeps appearing once you start looking. The prehistoric world is full of the assumption that ancient humans were primarily threatened by things they could run from, fight, track, or anticipate. The archaeological record tells a very different story. The most lethal threats were the ones that gave no warning, that moved at night, that appeared from directions the human body wasn't built to monitor. And the fear responses that developed in answer to those threats, still operational, right now, in you. But to understand the full picture, you have to start with what happened after the sun went down. Picture a cave entrance in South Africa, roughly 1.8 million years ago. The fire is burning low. It's the middle of the night, and somewhere just beyond the edge of the light, something is watching and waiting, silently. The leopard is one of the most effective ambush predators that ever existed. It can carry prey twice its own body weight straight up a vertical tree. It hunts predominantly at night. It makes almost no sound, and it has been found in direct physical association with early human remains. At Swartkrans Cave in South Africa, hominin bones bearing leopard tooth marks have been excavated from the same sediment layers as stone tools. These creatures weren't just sharing a continent with early humans. They were sharing the same shelters, competing for the same rock overhangs. Your ancestors didn't fear leopards the way you might fear them in a zoo. They slept within earshot of them. They found the remains of their kills at dawn. They heard the cough, the deep, rasping, territorial cough, in the dark. And what that pressure produced over hundreds of thousands of years was one of the most universal fears in the human species: fear of the dark. Not as a metaphor, literally. Studies consistently show that nyctophobia, fear of darkness, is among the most common human fears across every measured culture. Children who have had no frightening experiences in darkness still develop it around age 2. Adults who know, rationally, that their bedroom is safe still experience measurable physiological arousal when the lights go out. This is not irrational. This is calibrated survival software, installed by millions of years of being hunted at night by things that could see better than you in the dark. But darkness was just the delivery mechanism. The predator that terrified ancient humans more than any leopard goes back further, much further. So far back that it predates our species by tens of millions of years. In 2006, a biological anthropologist at the University of California named Lynne Isbell published one of the most paradigm-shifting papers in modern evolutionary biology. Her argument, developed further in her 2009 book, was this: snakes evolved to be difficult to detect and mortally dangerous, and surviving their threat for millions of years required selective pressure that favored specialized visual systems in primates. In other words, snakes didn't just scare our ancestors. According to Isbell, snakes may have built primate brains. The logic is merciless in its simplicity. Snakes were the first and most persistent predators of early mammals. They're cryptic, camouflaged, nearly invisible until they move, and their bites can kill within minutes. For small, ground-level mammals, a snake you didn't detect first was frequently a death sentence. So over millions of years, the lineage that survived was the one that could spot them faster, which required better color vision, forward-facing eyes, depth perception, a visual cortex capable of processing complex, irregular patterns at extraordinary speed. The Pulvinar region of the brain, which helps visually detect relevant objects, is disproportionately large and effective in the brains of primates, including humans. And in 2013, researchers put this directly to the test. They measured the electrical activity of individual neurons in the pulvinar of macaque monkeys, animals raised in captivity who had never encountered a snake, while showing them images of snakes, monkey faces, monkey hands, and geometric shapes. Snakes elicited the strongest and fastest responses. Of the 91 neurons that became active, 40% were classified as snake best, meaning they fired preferentially for snake images above all other stimuli. Other scientists showed that people and monkeys can detect snakes before becoming consciously aware of them. Your brain has dedicated hardware for snakes, not because snakes are dangerous in general, but because they were dangerous to your ancestors for so long and so persistently that detecting them became woven into the visual architecture of your species. Ophidiophobia, fear of snakes, is one of the most common and intense phobias among the general population. This is why you can acquire a snake phobia in a single encounter, but need dozens of exposures to begin reducing it. The fear has a different address in your brain than the fear of, say, cars or electrical outlets, which kill far more people, but which you don't flinch at in photographs. But even this, the darkness, the leopard, the snake, is not the deepest answer. There was something else, something that didn't have teeth, something ancient humans had absolutely no framework to understand or fight. And the terror of it reshaped everything. Think about the most dangerous thing you could encounter in the ancient world that had no body, no claws, no face. It moved through groups of people and left them dead within days. It seemed to choose victims randomly. It left no trace of itself on the landscape. It arrived without warning and sometimes vanished just as suddenly. Disease. Invisible microbial death was not something ancient humans could conceptualize, but they could observe its effects, and those effects were catastrophic. A single pathogen outbreak could eliminate half a tribe before anyone understood what was happening. And crucially, it appeared to follow contact with certain things: rotting meat, contaminated water, the bodies of the recently dead. Psychologist Paul Rosen at the University of Pennsylvania spent decades studying what he termed the behavioral immune system, the principle that disgust is not primarily an aesthetic response. It's a disease avoidance mechanism running millions of years before humanity had any concept of bacteria or viruses. The deep, involuntary revulsion you feel toward rot, toward certain smells, toward specific textures of food, that's not squeamishness. That is an ancient diagnostic system telling you, do not ingest that, do not touch that, do not let that enter your body. It drove food taboos across cultures. It shaped early burial practices. It is almost certainly one reason that ancient societies began separating the sick from the healthy long before anyone understood transmission. The behavioral immune system was in many ways a fear of the invisible, and that is the thread that leads directly to the most psychologically significant fear in human history, the one that built everything. In the Schaller Cave in southern France, there are paintings approximately 36,000 years old. The quality, quantity, and condition of the artwork found on its walls is stunning. Horses, rhinoceroses, lions, bears, depicted with a sophistication that still unnerves modern artists who study them. Here's what most people don't know. Chauvet, dark, cold, forbidding, was not a dwelling. According to Jean Clotes and David Lewis Williams, caves like it functioned as gateways to a netherworld where spirits were thought to dwell. Elite members of Paleolithic societies entered these caves for ritualistic communion with the spirits, reaching out through their drawings. You needed torches, grease lamps, and pigment to go inside the caves, navigating narrow, suffocating passages in total darkness to reach chambers nobody lived in, to make images nobody in their daily life would ever see. Why would you do that unless the act itself was the point? Lewis Williams argues that these painted caves were not galleries, but sacred spaces. Many images are located in hard-to-reach areas, suggesting ritual or initiatory use. Shamans served as mediators between visible and invisible worlds. And the invisible world, to ancient humans, was primarily populated by one thing: the dead. The evidence for this fear is ancient and widespread. Deep in the Atapuerca Mountains of Spain, at a site called Cima de los Huesos, Pit of Bones, researchers found the remains of at least 28 pre-Neanderthal individuals, approximately 430,000 years old, at the bottom of a 13-meter vertical shaft. The hominins might have plummeted to their deaths, but some researchers think they were deliberately placed there. Not abandoned, not eaten, placed in the deepest, most inaccessible chamber available. The dead needed somewhere to go. They needed to be managed, sent properly into whatever came next. Because the alternative, a spirit left unmoored, an ancestor not honored, a death not ritually completed, was not a philosophical problem. It was a genuine, visceral terror. This is the fear that built religion, that built the first stories humans ever told. Not what might eat us, but where do they go after? And will they come back? Look at what that fear produced. Burial rites, grave goods, sacred sites, ancestral worship, the concept of an afterlife, the birth of symbolic art. Art is not a luxury of culture. It is central to the formation of social identities and spiritual worldviews. Symbolism helps cement group cohesion, manage anxieties, and transmit knowledge. The entire architecture of organized religion, the first stories, the first music, the first deliberate ritual, all of it is downstream from this one thing: the terror of death's unresolved edge. Now look at what you're left with. A fear of the dark, installed by nocturnal predators over hundreds of thousands of years. A fear of snakes, neurologically wired into the primate visual system before our species existed. A revulsion toward contamination and rot. A disease avoidance system that saved countless lives without ever knowing what a pathogen was. And a deep, unresolved dread of death and what follows. The original engine of ritual, art, and spiritual belief. None of these disappeared when humans built cities. None of them faded with the invention of electricity or medicine or science. They just migrated. The horror genre is the most enduringly popular form of storytelling across every culture that ever produced narrative. And what does it return to, obsessively, across every era and every tradition? The thing in the dark, the creature you can't hear coming, the dead that won't stay properly dead. Berger suggested that the primordial threat of raptor predation may have left its mark on our genes, that many people standing outside and sensing a shadow pass overhead feel a tingle and instinctively yank their heads skyward, not because they've ever been hunted by an eagle, because something deep in them still remembers being small and soft and visible from above. That is the inheritance, a chain of fear stretching back millions of years, encoded not in memory, but in neurons, in the architecture of a visual cortex that evolved partly to spot a coiled shape in the grass, in the spike of adrenaline when the lights go out, in the ritual discomfort that still attaches across every culture on Earth to the handling of the dead. Ancient humans feared what they couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't explain. They pass that fear to you, and it is, without question, part of the reason you're still here to receive it.